Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Italian sports journalist Nima Tavallaey Roodsari. How are you doing, Nima? Thanks very much for coming on.
I'm good. It's good to be with you.
Good, yeah, it's very good to have you on, man. We've been planning this episode for quite some
Yeah.
time, and we're really excited to get it going. So myself and Nima are going to be talking through the story of another Italian football team, and the story is quite interesting. A lot of parallels can be drawn with Palermo, the other Italian team that we covered. We are, of course, going to be discussing AC Cesena. A club founded in 1940 and dissolved in 2018, 2019, I think I'm right in saying. And then soon a Phoenix club were formed not long after it. And Nima is very much the expert on all things Italian football, so he's going to be helping me chat through it. But before we kick things off, Nima, and get into things, why don't you tell myself and our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Well, my name is Nima Tavallaey Roodsari. I'm an Italian football journalist and expert, and who's been working covering Italian football for 12 years. I'm not Italian in my background. I was born in Iran, came to Sweden at the age of 3, but I have family in Italy who've lived there for 40, 50 years. And I've studied Italian both at what do you call it, sixth form and college, as you guys call it in the UK, and then afterwards at university level at a private university in Florence. But my love for Italian football has always been there, and I started in 2012 when I founded my own website or news site, I should say, called Sempre Inter, where we covered Inter, or we cover Inter in English 24/7, 365 days a year. And that quickly exploded, so that, and I never wanted to become anything else other than an independent journalist working for the independent media. I've never, ever even applied for a job for corporate media.
Nice.
I
like that.
No, I was never interested in that. I mean, if they want me to go on, like, for example, when, BBC or whatever, or whoever, Deutsche Welle or whatever, they want to meet me and interview me, then that's fine. But I would never work for them, because what they are buying, I'm not selling.
Yes.
I always wanted to do, and also I want to do things on my terms. I want journalism. The kind of journalism I like doing is the kind of journalism that I think is important, and I think is lacking. So a lot. And so what we basically do with Sempre Inter is basically covering Inter 24/7 in English. We do our own exclusives. We have done very many exclusives, which have been world exclusives. And then after that, I did a few freelance gigs for back in the day for goal.com, interviews with players and transfer exclusives. And of course, Gianluca Di Marzio, when he started his website, I was involved in his English page, running that for a few years. And then I've done freelance work here and there, and now we started the Italian football podcast, myself and Carlo Garganese, who I got to know when he was the global head of content at Goal.
Nice.
And we became very good friends, even though I'm an Interista and he's a Juventino. Let's just say we talk about everything and we debate everything except Calciopoli. That's just something we do not talk about. We have, and we've screamed at each other over it because he's studied it and wrote about it extensively, and so have I. But we just have come to diametrically opposed conclusions. Basically, I'm right and he's wrong, and he's not here. He's not here, so we can talk back. No, but he's a very good friend and a colleague, and so we started. We do the Italian football podcast together, and we always wanted to we wanted to do a podcast that covers Italian football the way we want to do it. We want to do it by covering today, but also contextualizing with history. We also have, we've had Roy Hodgson on, Sven-Goran Eriksson on, we've had lots of former players, current players. We had Destiny Udoji on before anyone knew who he was, because we want, that's also part of what we think is important to educate the audience, is new talent, not just the old. Everybody can Google the old, but also, we had Lazar Samardžić on before the whole mess last summer when he was going to go to Inter. We do deep dive profiles on players. We try to interview everyone that is connected to Italian football in some way, whether they're president, past president, coaches, players, past players, whatever, what have you. So, and also, of course, every Monday we do a review show of the week. Then Tuesdays we have a Q&A pod where our patrons send in their questions, and Thursdays we do a midweek review and preview the weekend, and of course every other week we do the interview podcast as well. But yeah, no, basically, and we try to stay away from, we try to be as selective as possible with our advertising and stuff like that. So that's why we've basically decided to monetize via Patreon. But
nice.
but the Monday pod is free, and it's all available on all podcasts, on all platforms, the Italian Football Podcast. And then if you want to have everything without any ads, then you go to Patreon, and for patreon.com/TIFP, and then you get everything for $2.99 a month. Really, that's
nice.
We do.
You can't really get much for $2.99 a month these days.
Well, that's another thing. We've been a lot of people are saying, "Oh, you guys are too cheap," and we're like, "Well, no, because we want everyone to be able to afford it."
Yeah, that's
literally.
You want it to be accessible. You don't want to make sure.
I don't want to. I hate this tier nonsense as well. Like, oh, we'll get more. No. We do what we do, and if you want and you think, because I know, in today's, let's be honest, and we are, people can barely afford food now. It's $2.99 may not sound like a lot, but it is to someone who's struggling, and at the same time they also have a right to enjoy themselves and live and listen to things. And so we think if they like Italian football, so we've decided we're never gonna, unless Patreon forces us to to raise our prices, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the type of thing where if people want to spend that £2.99 on something that's going to make them feel a little bit better if they are struggling, something that's going to entertain them, and something that they enjoy, that they can engage with, then at the end of the day it's worth it. And it's very gratifying knowing that even if our people are struggling, that they pay that money towards what you're doing in your project to help you build it. There's a niceness in it, and I think it's amazing that you're keeping it like that and keeping it accessible. But I mean, yeah, it sounds like you've interviewed and been around a star-studded cast of characters for certain. So you must have had some really, really interesting and amazing conversations with people. So I'm assuming through your work, your independent work, your journalism, and your podcast that you'd consider yourself a bit of an expert on Italian football history, then, Nima.
I think it's expert is a term that I think, we have a saying in Iran that the heavier the fruit on the branch of the tree, the lower the branch goes, and in the sense of being, in terms of humility. I would say I'm educated on it, but I would never go so far as to call myself an expert on anything. I believe that as long as you're alive, you're a scholar, or you're a student, I should say. As long as you're alive, you're a student, and you can always learn more. But I would say yes, I feel that I do have possessed knowledge on matters, but of course you can always acquire more.
Yeah, I totally agree with you as well. Absolutely love that metaphor about humility and staying humble. You're only an expert in your own mind. You're only an expert from all the things that you've read. But the moment you meet someone else who knows something that you don't, then you're still learning. And I think the challenge is learning and pushing yourself and always challenging yourself. To say, we're going to be discussing AC Cesena. Of course, AC Cesena were founded in 1940, I believe. Weren't the first club from Cesena. There were a few others before them under different names and taking different names and doing different things. But they kind of hit the ground running, AC Cesena, and they became successful, not overnight, but almost immediately. Would that be fair to say, Nima?
Yes, I mean they I would say that they were formed pretty late, if we're perfectly honest. I mean, from an Italian football point of view, I mean, in 1940, during the middle of the Second World War, and I would say that I mean, they didn't reach Serie B until 1968, and they reached Serie A for the first time in 1973. But I would, they are a relatively young club.
Definitely.
by Italian standards, and they've had some incredible success. I mean, this is a place that this is just this this provincial side from Emilia Romagna, who who where the big club is Bologna. Historically is Bologna, and so it's an interesting story. They have an
Yeah,
interesting story. I mean, in the fact that 2 years or 3 years, should I say, after they first reached the Serie A, they finished sixth in the Serie A and they qualified for the UEFA Cup.
yeah.
But
They played Magdeburg. Is that right?
I think so, yeah,
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 I think that's their only European tie. They won the home tie and then they
mm,
lost away from home. So,
yeah.
but yeah, no, it's incredible and amazing that they managed to get that stage as well. And one of the commonalities we found with a lot of the clubs that we've covered through this run anyway, just the club from the book, is that some of them burn really quickly, live fast, die young. We say they'll they'll be money balled through some way. They'll be bankrolled. They'll play a couple of European ties, and then within the next few years they're gone again. Whereas others, and Cesena is definitely one of these teams. It's a bit more of a slow burner, but it's always the same thing where they reach this peak and then it's just down, and it just continues going down from there until we dissolve.
Yeah. No, I mean, the dissolution I'm sure we'll get to. But it is a club with that if you look at who they are, and if you look at how Italian football, it's very difficult to win trophies,
Yeah.
because of the difference, not just in support but also it's hard to explain how big Inter, Milan, and Juve are, or Napoli and Naples, or Roma, but especially the three striped clubs from the north, Inter, Milan, Juve. They really, really swallow up all the air in the room.
Mm.
And for a club like Cesena, a provincial side, in Emilia Romagna, to I mean, now I think they've got a population of 97,000. That's not a lot.
No, not by any
Um,
means.
so it's and to think that they've actually played in the Serie A quite a bit, and they have you know launched the careers of quite a few interesting players and big players, and they have had some incredible success by their standards.
Mm. Yeah, and just when you mentioned former players there, Gianluigi Savoldi, one that comes to mind. A number of other notable former players as well, not just Italian as well. You've had people in there who are Chilean, Japanese players, Argentinian, Austrian, from all corners of the globe, really. I mean, it just seems like for the community they were involved in, and for the size of club that they were through the majority of their history, it might be easy to look at them and say, well, they're in the third tier, so they're small, but they weren't by any means. I mean, they had a huge number of fans. They had a really, really long and prosperous and brilliant history. And there's a number of other clubs, as I said, kind of behind that before 1940 as well, that are kind of involved in it, sorry, and yeah, they're just a really, really fascinating club, and I just love hearing about the history of them. As you say, they did eventually manage to reach Serie C and then Serie B, and they managed to reach Serie A a few times as well, maybe a handful of times, if that. Was there any periods of inconsistency during that time, on or off the field, or was it a case of straight up and then they would yo-yo for a little bit and are going from strength to strength, or did they just kind of fumble around and then have a couple of lucky seasons?
Well, I mean, Dino Manuzzi, who is the uh, president who the stadium is named after, he brought. I mean, he brought them to the Serie A. Um, he was he sold the club to his grandson Edmeo Lugaresi, who is the father of Giorgio Lugaresi, who I'm sure we're going to get to as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he was Dino Manuzzi was named He was born in Cesena on 14th of October 1907, and he died in Cesena in 1982, 29th of May. He was very, very respected, and he's the one, of course, who brought them to, just 24 years after their foundation, he brought them to Serie B, and he got them to Serie A. And of course, he got them to the UEFA Cup as well.
Exactly.
Which is their greatest moment, a club like Cesena reaching the UEFA Cup. However, of course, that season when they played in the UEFA Cup, they were also relegated to Serie B again, which is kind of very symptomatic of a lot of these Italian provincial clubs in that era. I remember Atalanta reaching the semi-final, I think, of the Cup Winners' Cup whilst playing in Serie B in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, when Glenn Strömberg was there. I think it was late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember exactly the date. But it's very typical in the sense that they can't, these even when Italian football was at its best, these tiny little, these provincial sides couldn't compete on two fronts, so to speak.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
struggled on that.
it is quite interesting. And I think one thing that I wanted to ask as well, just kind of bringing it back a few years maybe, obviously the club were founded in 1940 during World War II, which is interesting within itself, particularly given the context of football in Italy at that time. There's a really good book called The Defiant by Chris Lee, released not long ago, about players and football and institutions under fascist regimes and other similar regimes in the modern era. And they do cover Italy and Germany and Spain in it as well. There's some really, really fascinating stories in that about partisan fighters playing for different football teams and going off to fight fascism. Some other stories as well on the other side of players who would prop up the regime. And I've mentioned it a few times in the podcast before, but it's really good to give a political context for a lot of nations. And how football continued during that time. But, when you're talking about people who are fighting for their lives and doing things for other people's lives, it's incredible stories. Obviously, one of the big stories from Italy in World War II, where football is concerned, is it Spezia? Spezia won a title, which obviously they hold on to, but it's largely sort of disputed, and it's a bit of a point of contention. I mean, do you think it would have been seen as strange that a football team were founded during this time in Cesena? Would they have had any hope of being able to repeat a feat like that, or maybe trying to take advantage of the situation that the world was in at that point?
I think Italian football has never. The one thing that makes Italian football so incredibly unique is that the Italian society, where Italian society ends and begins, and where football begins and ends, you can't really tell it. They are, you honestly can't. I can't think of very many. Look, football is inherently part of society everywhere, right? The thing about Italian football that is so unique is that you really can't say where Italian society begins and ends and where Italian football begins and ends. When Italian society, when Italy does well as a country, as a society, Italian football does well. When Italian society is in the doldrums, Italian football is in the doldrums.
Fascinating.
It's it's in that context that you have to understand what it is that that things happen. In 1940, we're talking 4-5 years into the war, quite a few years into fascism, and without making any kind of context, references otherwise, but I mean, back then, fascists and their anti-fascist, sports was something you wanted people to do. You wanted to keep the populace active. Whether or not you were a fascist or not, you wanted to create these piazza, these squares, these meeting places where people met.
Sure.
Because that's where you could bring people together. You could bring all kinds of people together, and that and Cesena is also part of that. I mean, I do find it a little bit peculiar that it happened in 1940 of all times, but then again, it is also a bit, you look at it and you go, well, it's typically Italian football. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Of course, when the country's at war, and lots of its sons died, regardless of which side you were on, it was difficult for people, right? But in the middle of
Yeah.
that, a football club was founded to keep the citizens of Cesena, for them to have a place where where the men could meet and the women could in the stands meet. It became a more than just a social thing as well. It became a part of it's difficult to dress it in words, but when things are at their darkest, people need a meeting place that kind of takes away from the horrors of everyday life,
Mm.
and football in Italy is just like it's been everywhere, is like that.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I mean, why it was founded in 1940, I guess that's peculiar, but if you dig deep enough, I'm sure you'll find specific reasons for that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with a lot of what you said as well. I think it would probably be a mix of those things, where you're absolutely right. It was founded to bring people together, something for people to do. The other clubs in Cesena at that point as well would contextually have something to do with it, whether they were around, whether they'd lost players or not, whether people wanted to found a new club. It's a very, very interesting point and something for us, I think, to research. But moving on from the founding, obviously they kind of started working their way up the divisions, and they had a couple of sort of reasonable spells in Serie A, 4 years at one point, a couple of years here, and another year or so there. And eventually they managed to get to the UEFA Cup, as you said, and have their sort of first taste of Europe. Um, I mean, obviously, we can only imagine what the feeling would have been like around that time. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the run up to getting there, the types of things that they would have had to endure, the different trophies that they won on their way to reaching the UEFA Cup?
Well, I mean, just getting promoted to first, Serie C, and under Dino Manuzzi, and then in 67, 68, they reached the seventh to Serie B, and then of course 72, 73 they reached the Serie A. That's it's Italian football has always been, the financial model has always been where it's never been like you could say in many other places, which is like in Sweden, or especially Sweden and Germany, where you've got the 51% rule, as it's called.
Sure.
Italian football has never been like that. Yes, it's always been founded in the people, but it's always been one entrepreneur
Mm.
who backs the club financially, and of course for social currency purposes, because I mean, they never make any money when they run Italian football. Well, when you run an Italian football club, at least historically, I'm talking back then.
Yeah.
The phenomenon of modern football is something that Italian football has struggled a lot to deal with, and that's why Italian football has fallen so far behind. The fact that you have to be solvent as a football club is a very new concept in Italian football. You
Sure.
actually have to make plus and minus add up, right? Because the owners traditionally are entrepreneurs, wealthy, who buy clubs, invest modestly, or step by step invest and bring them up. And then, of course, when you have success in Italian football, you have success in Italian society. It's
Sure.
social currency, and that opens up a lot of doors, and you make your money back via your business. There's in other avenues, if you know what I mean. So that, for
Sure.
example, if you own a company A and you use that money, and via that company A, you buy the club and you invest money into the club. Well, company A can then, because if it goes well for you in Italian football, then that opens up a lot of doors for company A to monetize in different avenues, if that makes sense, kind of speak.
Yeah.
And also political power as well, because again, you can't say where Italian football begins and where Italian society begins and ends. Like they are sewn into each other. So he Dino Manuzzi, I mean, he was very open and honest about that. He wanted the club to reach the Serie A.
Mm.
He was very, very open and honest about that. And he, if I'm not mistaken, he also I mean, the stadium. If I'm not mistaken, I'm just double checking my my facts here. But if I'm not mistaken, he was he was also involved in building La Fiorita, the new stadium as well.
He's one of the people that when we talk about AC Cesena has to be discussed because he done so much for the club, and I think it's important to remember that obviously we can only look back on these things through the lens of modern football, and a lot of the things might seem strange, but even then, people being honest with how they want a club to be, what they want to do with that club, and where they want to take them. It was not unheard of, but it was certainly out of the ordinary because, particularly in that era, sort of coming out of the 60s and into the 70s, football really begins to become commercialized then. And I'm not saying that charlatans and different people didn't exist before that who would take advantage of football clubs and their financial positions. They certainly did, but wasn't as much as it is nowadays, and kind of moving into the 21st century.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But no, so basically, the building of that new stadium was very, very important. It was called La Fiorita because it was basically in that part of the city where it was called,
Mm.
where it was built, La Fiorita. And it was built with, I mean, it just had one stand at first. And then, of course, it's been refurbished three times.
Sure.
1961, 1969, and 1988, if I'm not mistaken, and rebuilt and made bigger, of course. But yeah, no, I mean, Dino Manuzzi was someone who was very respected in football, or and in Italian society as well. He was considered, um, he wanted to and of course when he died on 29th of May 1982, the stadium was of course named after him.
Hmm.
So after the yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it maintained that even after being rebuilt, refurbished in 1988, in the summer of 1988.
Of course.
But yeah, no, he's probably, I mean, he's the most, I mean, the Manuzzi family, you can say, was the most important one, was the most important family in Cesena's history. And you can say that quite often about Italian football, that a lot of the times there is one family that is so tied to a club. I mean, the Agnelli family, when they celebrated 100 years, have bought the club.
Mm.
The Moratti family at Inter, and the Sensi family at Roma, and so on and so forth. It usually is like that. You have a family who is attached to a club.
Mm.
And of course, the Manuzzi family, with all the grandchildren and brothers who were, and so on, that were involved, after that is is a testament to that, even though it kind of ended really badly, with Giorgio.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, off the top of my head, the only one that I can really think of over here, because it wasn't really common over here. I mean, it probably was closer to the beginning of the 20th century. But the one that sticks out most in my mind is Celtic. The Kelly family and the White family were tied to Celtic, particularly the Kellys, for a very, very long time until they were ultimately deposed, basically. When Fergus McCann bought the club and saved us with 8 minutes to go, I think it was, something along those lines. So yeah, it's one of those things when you're running a club properly and you have this vision, and not only that, but when the family love the club as well and they're steeped in the club, then it can be run in a really, really good and efficient and sustainable way. And yeah, you can build this really, really kind of powerful dynasty where you're carrying on different visions from different people, and it's just a nice sense of consistency as well. I think something that again you don't really get in modern football.
No, no, modern football is
Shit.
something else. Yeah, I mean it's something else. I really believe in this kind of dividing football up in different eras. But for me, after for me, the World Cup 1994 is when modern football really begins.
Mm,
Before that, you have, well, you have, it's still professional football, but there's all, I mean, from 80s and nine, I mean, from 1978 or 1980 until 1992, it's still professional football, but it's a different, it's not modern football.
yeah.
Modern football for me begins honestly 1994 with the World Cup in America.
Hmm.
Things happen step by step. For
Yeah.
1994, the birth of modern football to start, you have had to have the era of from 1980 to 1992 too, which was always going towards that direction.
Hmm.
And so modern, that's why I kind of go like, oh, modern football this time. Well, yeah, we've kind of always been going towards this, haven't we? I
Mm,
mean, it's especially from the 80s and onwards. It's been clear that this has been the direction they wanted to take it, and now it's kind of reached a point where people are turning off,
yeah.
are turned off by it because it's too greedy and too much in your face, and it's not. It's become more of a circus, hasn't it? More than
Yeah.
a game. And when
Absolutely.
things
It's a
become a
circus and
circus, people get turned off, don't they?
it's a circus and a merry-go-round, and
Yeah.
you see that with a lot of the top clubs in the top leagues. The same managers, the same players, just constantly getting cycled over and over again. The same mismanagement happening over and over again. And I think that's why more and more people are turning towards community football and football lower down the divisions. But there's always going to be that risk that the same thing happens to those teams because the people in charge of modern football, if you want to say that, they're clever people, they're not stupid, and if they see where people are going, that's where they'll go too. So there's always going to be that threat.
But I mean,
But
if we take, for example, how Cesena was founded, literally how it was in 1940, when Alberto Rognoni, the Count, he was only 21 years old.
yeah.
His brother, his younger brother, I think, Carlo, was a goalkeeper in Forli, a team in Serie D back then. They had an idea to create a club in Cesena with the same colors of the weapon or armor of the city, right?
Mm,
And together with one of the former players, I think Arnaldo Pantani, I think his name is, he played for Renato Serra, which was a club that existed in Cesena, thanks to Aldo Proli, who was, they called it, and they named it Renato Serra after a, they named it after a poet, a young poet who died in the First World War, if I'm not mistaken. So, if we take that, and then of course they, together with Arnaldo Pantani, who was a former player of Renato Serra and also played for Prato in Serie C, and of course Renato Piraccini, who owned a leather goods shop on Corso Mazzini, but he was also a former director of Renato Serra, the club. They basically all came together. So you have Italian aristocracy, you have Italian the birth of the Italian bourgeoisie, if you will, in someone owning a shop, owning a goods shop. But they were all tied together with a passion of football and decided they wanted to create this together, and that's what they did. And yeah, and they on 21st of April 1940 was born. But I mean, that's kind of how the birth became. That's how the birth came about it, didn't it?
yeah.
So I mean, but that's very typically Italian at that time as well. I mean, if you look at it, which is the point I was making to your point, is that look, you had aristocracy who had social currency and money. You had back then just a young bourgeois class, who were business class, middle class, who were just starting to grow their business inside their country, but they were still with people, right?
Yeah.
and they were and so you had different layers of social classes coming together to build something together, and that's how Italian society looked at the time.
Mm.
It wasn't organic as such. Many times it was organic, but it was, you had this kind of this kind of coming together of different social classes to do something, because they all needed each other to grow, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, it was
um,
a collective effort for something that they viewed as being the common good, if you want to
yes,
simplify it. Yeah.
exactly, and so that's how Cesena came to be. Now, all football clubs absolutely did not come like that. For example, Inter, the club that I support, they were founded because of a Swiss player was not allowed. They were all playing for AC Milan in 1908, but they were not allowed. One of their players was Swiss, and he was not allowed in because they had an only Italian policy.
Yeah.
And so they, they left AC Milan and they went to, at this local restaurant bar called Orologio, which was at the time a place for intellectuals and artists. And on that night, 9th of March, the famous words, "We call the club Internazionale because we are brothers in the world." That was very organic. Didn't have any backing at all. It was a group of people who were pissed off that their friend who was Swiss was not allowed to play because he was Swiss, and he, but it was kind of, again, you had all different classes of people in that. You had artists, you had workers, you had everything, right? But I mean, but Inter and Milan have always traditionally been two middle class clubs.
Mm. Yeah,
But
that's the thing. It is, and it always has been very egalitarian.
hmm,
It's like Queen's Park, for instance, the first, one of the first clubs to be founded in Scotland, depending on who you speak to and which line of research you kind of choose to follow. If you're of that opinion, there was, by the time that any other serious challengers came about to what was very much their reign in Scotland at the time. I mean, they weren't just the best team in Scotland; they were one of, if not the best team in the UK at the point. They invented the passing game. They took it all over the world, to England, to Argentina, Hungary, and elsewhere. And they were absolutely incredible. People were blown away watching them. But by the time any other serious challengers came around, for instance, Celtic, when Dumbarton came to challenge them, Rangers, other clubs, Queens Park were viewed as the posh team. They were viewed as the middle class team because it was this group of well-educated gentlemen who'd studied football. They knew the game inside and out, and they were the ones to beat. And there was a class dynamic to it, because it's like, well, if you're Celtic, you're coming from a very poor background, where you're presumably an Irish migrant, and you've not had enough money to feed your family. If you're coming from Rangers, you're coming from the industrial, sort of heartland of Glasgow and Govan. And you're coming up against these guys who are basically scholars, and there was this element of not class warfare. I don't think it was that strong, but it certainly added to the competitiveness when they played each other.
of course. But yeah, no, it's I mean, and of course, without talking about Cesena, to tie back to Cesena as to who they were, in terms of political class, they weren't, they were. There's no doubt that at the time the people in power were the fascists, and of course, if you're in power and you're rich and you're a count and all that, then you kind of understand where this was. But
Sure.
it's not, it's not, it doesn't make them a fascist club, if you understand what I mean.
No, no, of course. People would have said that they were fascists to save the lives of their families and themselves. Football clubs did the same. And there is something in standing up against it, but for the most part, if you stood up against it as an individual without some kind of collective backing, or as part of a wider movement, then you would have been eradicated almost immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. But to get back to Cesena, when Dino Manuzzi comes in 1964, after 24 years after having founded the club, the Count Rognoni decides to sell the club to a group of entrepreneurs, led by Dino Manuzzi, and he takes over the club,
Mm.
and he becomes, or he doesn't take over the club, but he becomes the president of the club, and he immediately starts to turn the club into a club that became a model for how other provincial clubs would carry themselves,
Oh wow.
in the sense that he wanted to find young players,
Mm.
um, you know, who, and that's, he for example, he Giampiero uh, Giampiero Ceccarelli
Mm.
plays. I mean, he played for them for all his, pretty much all his career, or he for 20 years, 520 league matches, and then of course he coached them as well. He played his entire career as a wing back or a fullback on the left,
Mm.
even though he was right-footed. That he was, that's one player they found, and he was with them throughout that entire era. And of course, a certain person named Ariedo Braida, who then became a legendary sporting director at Milan,
Yeah.
who brought the three Dutchmen to Milan, and since then he's been at Barcelona and so was. But yeah, we're talking about, between 86 and 2013, he was the sporting director. Well, up until 2002, he was the sporting director, and then he became the general director or CEO, if you will, of the
Mm.
club at Milan as well. But I mean, there was a lot of interesting people at the time there, and of course, one of the youth players that played at the club was Azeglio Vicini, who was born
Mm.
in Cesena in 1933. He came up the club in the 1950s. He played there. And who's Azeglio Vicini? Well, he was the national team coach, 86 to 91, and he coached Cesena for a brief period in 1993 too. So there were a lot of famous and competent people at that time because of how Dino Manuzzi ran the club in terms of finding young talent, and giving them, developing them, creating an environment where they can grow, and then selling them on, or taking the step up,
Mm. And it served them in good
step by
stead. I
step.
mean, I'm not sure if you mentioned them already, but Massimo Bonini as well.
Mm,
Obviously made just under 200 appearances for Juventus.
yeah.
They got him from Cesena, San Marinese. He managed the San Marino national team for a brief spell as well. I mean, they had so many incredible players coming through their ranks, and it's this model that really helped kind of propel them in a way, like that was their foundation for success. And it's a foundation that we do see working today still, and that clubs do kind of strive towards having so that they can survive and do well. I mean, it's interesting because normally with these clubs, it's kind of difficult to nail down club legends for people who played for them. Are there any players that kind of spring to mind that would be considered a Cesena legend?
Well, aside from the ones I mentioned, I would say, uh, I mean, Dario Hubner is a bit of a cult hero, isn't he?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
got his break there. I mean, but I wouldn't say that he was kind of, he was some sort of I wouldn't go so far as to say that he was some sort of club legend or anything like that.
Sure.
But no, I mean, it's, I'm trying to think of someone who, I mean, they've had some, they've had quite a few, notable former players. But I mean, in terms of retired numbers, they, of course, number 12 to the fans, and of course Paolo Martelli, who died in a car accident posthumously in 1999. But I mean, if you look at, players that maybe people listening to this would know, Vincenzo Iaquinta, World Cup winner,
Mm, yeah.
Antonio Candreva, Massimo Ambrosini, Sebastiano Rossi, who was the legendary Milan goalkeeper.
Yep.
Adrian Mutu played for Chelsea, has played there. Luis Jimenez played there. And Massimo Agostini, for those of you who love your 90s football, would recognize that name. So Ruggero Rizzitelli, another 90s striker who played for Bayern Munich and Roma. And of course later on Yuto Nagatomo, Emanuele Giaccherini. I don't know if I mentioned Candreva. They had also Alessandro Bianchi, who spent 8 years at Inter as a midfielder. No, I mean this is what I mean. Like they kind of this was a club that produced and had some really good players. I mean, they also sparked, as I said, the careers of some very important people in terms, Braida, for example, even though he was there, but he then became and it's just like Auxilio Vicini was a player there. A lot of people who might not have made it as players but became really important, who might not have made it as players or made their mark as players but became really important people in Italian football. Like I said, Braida, Vicini, and of course also you have the Inter coach Bersellini, who was coaching them as well. I mean, he won 3, in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. He coached Inter, and he was also their coach. So this eye and knack for spotting talent, and this to be able to find coaches and players just before they peak and be kind of go upstream with them, and then when they go off, of course it's going to be difficult to replace them many times, but that kind of skill of identifying and finding the right people is something that is very, it's a skill, it's a skill called that Italian direttori sportivi, sporting directors. I mean, Italy is avant-garde, was world leading in the sporting director role. What is a sporting director? What does one do? What does a direttore generale do? What do they to build a football club and to do it with very little money and to find incredible talent and to grow that way, and so you buy player A for, if you're from a small club, especially the smaller clubs. I mean, if you discard the Milans, the Inters, the big clubs, but if you look at the smaller clubs and how you, with very little resources, can build something, interesting projects, finding young talent, spotting them, creating an environment where they do well, and then selling them on at a huge profit, and then investing that correctly in other young talents and so on, and kind of growing exponentially like that. It's not
a skill set that not a lot of people have, and I think a lot of people, they still don't understand what sporting directors or directors of football do, whatever you want to call them, because they, it's often a little bit mudded, but at the heart of it, their role is incredibly important because they are providing what makes a scouting network so powerful and so good and so useful to football teams.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And it's a skill that it's networking, it's knowing how to create an environment that works, being able to create a winning environment, finding the right coach, finding all these things, and the right tactics. And this is something, the Italian sporting director, and of course the politics of it, because again, Italian football and politics are inherently inseparable. Being able to run football politics, and that's what I mean not just politics in society or local politics, but also football politics.
Sure.
That's incredibly, that all of that, when I say that you can't separate Italian society and Italian football, that's what I mean. Italian football is inherently political, and I don't mean just political right, left, and stuff like that. I mean the politics of football, is something that is uniquely Italian in that sense.
Yeah.
And he was very good at maintaining and bridges and building relationships and creating a very good environment and surrounding himself, more importantly, with the right people. So yeah, I mean, and again, like I said, Ceccarelli, Giampiero Ceccarelli was, a legend at Cesena, but then of course, he became also a scout and scout and observer and technical backroom staff who won the World Cup in 2006 with Marcello Lippi.
Yeah.
So, it's again, all of this kind of came together when you build yourself, when you surround yourself with the right people and with good people, and you build something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a model that served them really well. As you said, it's about building blocks, basically. It's about putting these things in place that are going to help your club become successful, but then be able to sustain itself in the future as well. And it did so for Cesena for a very, very long time. Now, coming into the 21st century, they're in, I think they're in Serie B, the beginning of it. And they eventually returned to Serie A, sorry, in 2010. But they're then relegated just at the end of the 2011-2012 season, and it's at this point that the wheels start to come off a little
Well,
bit.
I want to go back a little bit there,
Okay.
because Dino Manuzzi, at that point, I mean, he was until 19, he takes over the club, or he is at the club until 1980, if I remember correctly. He's at the club. Yeah, he takes control of the club in Edmeo Lugaresi takes control of the club in 1980, and he's at the club from 1980 to 2002. And he's the grandson of Dino Manuzzi, and he'd taken the control of the club from his uncle. So, what happens then? He brings this relationship, this ability he continues, he inherits something from grandfather Manuzzi, but something that's working. And obviously he'd grown ill, Dino Manuzzi, and he died shortly after. But Edmeo Lugaresi takes over, and he's able to continue and build on the legacy of the granddad and that generation. And so he just shows, for example, he brings them up, I think, in his first season in charge as the president in 80-81. He brings them back up to Serie A, and it's again a team with just youngsters, coached by a certain Osvaldo Bagnoli, who won, who probably did one of the was the coach of one of the greatest miracles in Italian football a few years later, winning the Serie A with Hellas Verona in 1984-85.
Yeah.
That's the first season he does that in charge as the president. Luganese, he does that. They win 14 games at home, which is and they have the most average attendance, or they have the highest attendance in the Serie B when they play Milan, 28,602. They win 14 other games at home, and they go up, and Bagnoli, of course, left when they were promoted. And they bought a few players, not too famous players. They unfortunately they struggled all of that season, and it's but he still manages to kind of continue on and build and keep Cesena at the level that grandfather Dino Manuzzi had them at.
Mm.
And it's during this era, of course, Marcello Lippi comes in as well. Later on in 89-91, he's there for 2 seasons. Marcello Lippi, of course, the legendary Juventus and Italy coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is it. I mean, just some of the names that you're rhyming off as well that were involved or around Cesena or learned from each other. It's really, really a testament to how the club was running and how well they were kind of perceived at the time, even if results weren't good on the field and they were kind of going up and down a lot. I don't think it can be disputed that up until a certain point, the club was being run fantastically.
One of the funny things about Marcello Lippi, I mean, that's where he met Giampiero Ceccarelli, who became, of course, a scout and followed him to the national team. And they managed to stay up in the Serie A then as well. But and that's what I mean, like this kind of this skill of being able to, with very little, build something that stays up in the Serie A. And I mean, this is the era. Let's remember what era he's operating in. This is the era where the Serie A is the best league in a way that I don't ever think we will see a league dominate.
No.
In terms of quality. Literally every single world-class player in world football played in the Serie A in the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, without doubt. Incredible league. Absolutely.
It was just unbelievable. Like when you talk, I mean, even the provincial sides had superstars,
Yeah.
And just look at Zico. Where did he play?
Yep.
I mean, a lot of these guys, Socrates, I mean, a lot of these guys, they played for like provincial sides. They didn't play for the big clubs, but that's where it was at, I remember when I've spoken to Glenn Strömberg, the Swedish former international, played for Atalanta, and he said, and I told him, like, what are you the most proud of? You've won league titles, you won you miraculous continental treble, UEFA Cup, Swedish league with Sven-Goran Eriksson in 1982. Surely that's got to be. And he's like, yeah, those titles were great, but for me, the greatest achievement for me is having been able to hold my own in the best league that has ever existed as a captain of Atalanta. Because that's another thing. As a foreigner, to become a captain of a team at that time, I mean, still to this day, it's difficult. But at that time, when there was only 3 foreigners allowed per team, is incredible. And again, that's when Italian football were just unbelievable.
I mean, just from Scotland, you had Graham Souness, obviously played for Sampdoria. You had Joe Jordan, played for Milan and Verona. Going back for probably about 2 decades or so, you also had Dennis Law, who was playing for Torino at the time as well. And now there's a few more Scottish imports over Lewis Ferguson, Josh Doig, obviously Liam Henderson. Thinks Liam Henderson still plays with Verona.
Empoli, I think.
Empoli is Empoli now.
Yeah,
okay.
Doesn't Liam Henderson? Hang on, you're confusing me now. Josh Doig plays for Hellas.
Yes, so Josh Doig plays for Hellas.
Yeah.
Lewis Ferguson for Bologna.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
But you said Liam Henderson, no?
Liam Henderson played for Verona and now plays for Empoli.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Sorry, no, because sorry, I was just confused. Yeah,
that's okay. And you had Jack Hendry at Cremonese as well before he's now playing in the Saudi league. So, been a number of Scottish prospects over there as well. But I think
what's his name, wingback Aaron Hickey? No.
Aaron Hickey played for Bologna as well.
He was really good for Bologna.
He's an incredible prospect. Hearts should have got more money than they did for him. But again, in that period, the 80s and to a lesser extent the 90s, the fact that Joe Jordan and Graham Souness were playing in Italy was huge. It was massive. It's not something that, for stars of that level, it's not something that you'd see an awful lot of these days. And it was just, as you said, an absolutely incredible league to be playing in.
No, it was. But no, it really was. And that's the reason why I keep bringing that up is, again, you have to understand the context in which they operated, and that's when Italian football, the Maradonas, Italy won the World Cup in '82. It was just fantastic level of the Serie, and to be able, as a small club from Emilia Romagna, to be able to kind of work in that context and to not to stay in the Serie and of course granddad taking them to the UEFA Cup is truly unbelievable. They got relegated in 82-83, but the same coach who they were relegated under, Bruno Bolchi, brought them back up 86-87 in a playoff, if I'm not mistaken, against Lecce and Cremonese.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. So, just an incredible time to be a follower of football in Italy at that period of time, and of course as well with a lot of these smaller clubs and provincial clubs, the support are still as passionate and they're still as interested. It's not how we know it now, where the teams in the top quarter of the top flight are the most supported. Like, you had teams at all levels who had huge fan bases, and each fan was as passionate as the next about their club, and they wanted to see them do well. And in the case of Cesena, you'd like to think that for the most part, again, despite the kind of yo-yo aspects of the club, and the kind of inconsistencies of going up and down the tiers, you'd like to think that they had a pretty good time supporting them, particularly when they got to the UEFA Cup.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I mean, we're moving forward now to the 90s, and Marcello Lippi's debut as a coach in the Serie A is, of course, with Cesena 89-90, and he managed. It was a minor miracle for him to keep them up there, and they stayed in the Serie A until 1991 and then they were relegated again. And they had a chance to go up 93-94, but they lost to Padova in a one-off game in the neutral play in a neutral pitch in Cremona. Sorry. So no, it's so that kind of put them. That's when things start going bad, you can say.
Okay.
Because they kind of go down to Serie C, where they hadn't been for 29 years, if I'm not mistaken. But they kind of returned back to Serie B pretty quickly. But then again, of course, they were returned. They were a little bit of a yo-yo side, latter part of the 90s, early 2000s, between Serie B and Serie C.
So was it a result of the constant promotion and relegation, having to adapt the club infrastructure every other season, for instance, or was it a change in approach from the board or the owners or the chairman? Was it a complete changeover of chairman and board members?
No,
No?
because it's still Edmeo Lugaresi. Edmeo Lugaresi was still in charge. And of course, this is when he, in 2002, he sells the club, or he passes on the club to his son, Giorgio Lugaresi, who we will get onto now. And that's where things, let's just say that Giorgio was not, even though they had he was not of the same metal as his father and his and of course his great grandfather. And that's when things kind of, the financial dodginess kind of begins a little bit. He's involved with people who maybe, because at this point, where are we? We're in the 2000s now, right? We're in modern football. money is scarce and it's becoming more and more difficult to manage a club, and in order to do that, that's, you know, Italian football clubs, to survive, they have to start getting creative with their finances.
Certainly, creative is certainly one word to use. But no, you're right, and it's a very interesting period of time now. From the context in Scotland, you know, you've got Setanta. This is very much the Setanta era.
Mm.
Dundee and Livingston are signing former World Cup winners. Um, Players from all corners of the globe, Argentinian players, something that, you know, it's pretty unlikely that it'll ever happen again unless there's some huge £1 billion, you know, consortium that buys all these teams in the Scottish leagues. It was absolute insanity, and I think the obvious sort of novelty of it papered over what was something that was incredibly unsustainable and something that was very clearly going to crash and burn very, very soon. And eventually, when Setanta Sports went bust, that's exactly what happened. Dundee, Dunfermline, Livingston, um, all entered administration. They had huge financial troubles that we're still feeling the effects of. And I can imagine that it was the same in Seriea and the same with loads of Italian clubs. But as you said, they had to be a little bit more creative with their finances, and in many cases they were. Was it the same though in terms of once the rug was pulled, if you like, that many clubs folded or found themselves in financial turmoil?
I think what happened is that they started getting creative to make €1 work and have the buying power of €100.
Sure.
Euros, if you know what I mean. I mean, this is still the Lira era. It's not the Euro era, but I'm just basically kind of using that as an example to make you understand what was going on.
Sure.
And that, you know, he didn't start off. Giorgio's era didn't start off that well. They didn't. I mean, they were down in Serie C when he got them. When he had them, and he never got, you know, he never got them in his first turn, like because he owned the club twice, and that's when we get to the Igor Campedelli, who he sells the club to, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it's December 2007 that he sells the majority of the stocks to Igor Campedelli, who, well, you know, he became a president of the club for the first non-Lugaresi president in 27 years.
Sure.
But of course, Campedelli manages to get the club up the table. They win the Serie C in 2008, 2009. And they finished runners up in 2009, 2010 in Serie B to get to the Serie A. And you know, he's you know, they are there, but the financial kind of problems continued, and I mean, when they returned to 2010 into the Serie A, was the first time in 19 years that they'd returned back to the top flight.
Yeah.
But they were relegated again in 11-12 to Serie B, but then they started restructuring their finances, and a lot of creative accounting and a lot of, you know, restructuring in order to company mergers and so on and so forth. You know, because the Lugaresi family, or Giorgio Lugaresi, still owned 30% of the shares. I mean, he sold the majority, he was still there, and he still owned part of the club, was co-owner, but he didn't run it. It was more Campedelli.
Yeah.
But then he kind of, in 2013, he was brought back as the president, and there was a €9.5 million recapitalization in order to avoid bankruptcy, because now things were not working. but they were under. But the problem was that by February 2014, Cesena were under criminal investigation for fraud
They were.
in the Campidelli era.
Mm,
And of course, he was banned for 6 months, Campidelli, in March 2013.
mm,
But I mean, again, they still returned again back to the Serie Cesena in 2014, at the end of the 2013-14 season, via playoffs. And yeah, I mean, that's the last time we saw them, because when they disappeared from Serie A, and that's when all the plusvalenza, the capital gains stuff, started leaking out,
mm.
as in false accounting, inflating the values of players in different swap deals to make it look like you have more assets than you actually do.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, but they, so, and this happened in 2016, where Campidelli was sued, and he was eventually, due to statute of limitations, because that's another aspect of Italian sports law, and I don't really want to go too much into it because it's
Sure.
incredibly tricky and difficult, and there's you have to have 1 million thoughts in your head at the same time, and it gets really, really boring to listen to. But essentially, this leads to June 2018, when Cesena are again charged for false accounting, again in player swaps with Chievo, or this time with Chievo, and they wanted to, and this time they were in the Serie B, and the prosecutor wanted to penalize them 15 points, but they had to fold in 2018,
Yep.
declaring bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's there's another, and I said at the start of this, there's another club that kind of comes to mind, because what ends up happening is very much, there's a kind of lot of, there's maybe going to be point deductions, or we'll be able to pay this back, but it's just going to be rough for a few years, and then it's almost not with a bang, but with a whimper, the club is just gone all of a sudden. And the other club, of course, I'm thinking about is Palermo. When we discuss them, obviously it's not entirely similar, because with Palermo it was coined as an administrative error. We say in here
Yeah, they didn't have, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't have an insurance policy. They
something along
forgot.
those lines.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were, it was a club without an insurance policy. I mean, in terms of a traded club with which doesn't have any insurance, which is an extremely serious breach of Italian company law.
sure.
They had to just remove them from all leagues, not just the Serie B, the FIGC, because that you can't run. You're not allowed to do certain things.
No,
Uh, you know.
no, absolutely not. I mean, obviously, as you've mentioned throughout the episode, there's a lot of politics within Italian football. Not
Mm.
just a lot; they are intrinsically tied. I mean, do you feel, without getting too
But this is what I wanted to
excited?
get to, because this is where it
Yeah,
gets really funny. George, because again, this is Italy, right?
yeah,
He he sent an email, because this was kind of going to 4 p.m. This is 20th of June 2018, before this whole thing kind of dissolves and disappears. They wanted to, they were talking about refinancing and restructuring their debt, and of course because they were, if I remember, they could also, they were pretty confident, but on 16:50 or 4:51 p.m. he sends a long letter via email to, well, he sends it to people involved, and it's called, the email is titled "Suicide." And it starts, when you read, by the time you read this, I will be dead.
my
Um,
goodness.
which is I have not been able to save Cesena. For me, this is I can't live with this defeat.
No.
Many people who are close to me will remain without a job. I've destroyed like my family. Everything I love will now be auctioned off. I want to thank everyone who has worked with Cesena Calcio. I was certain that the restructure of the debt, we would have resolved the issue. I want to apologize for the errors I've committed, for the fact that I was not able to keep the accounts under sufficient control. But I was always aware of everything. I have given everything. And yeah. And you know, and he goes on basically, which is so but he, you know, he goes on about forever about, you know, because this is such a typical Italian, you know, football president thing to do. They are larger than life characters, many of these guys.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And I have a really fun story about Palermo as well, and Zamparini, which your listeners may not be aware of. And I think if you're doing something on Palermo, there's someone you absolutely have to bring on your podcast. He's a good friend of mine, Lorenzo Vicini.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
He's a Palermitano who he's from Sicily. Of course, parents are from Sicily. Speaks perfect Italian. Speaks perfect Sicilian. He's a big Palermo fan, but he's from the United States. And he got I'll come to that later, but he sent an email. He found out Zamparini's email address and he sent him an email and didn't think he was going to get a reply, but he did, which is hilarious.
Okay.
But this is the kind of people they are. They are larger than life. They talk, you know, and it's all very, it doesn't need to be coherent, but there's a lot of emotions involved.
Sure.
For example, Lugaresi Giorgio, in this email, he says that, you know, he's upset. He thanks some of the people or entrepreneurs who've supported the club, but he was also upset at others who were close to them, but did not save them. I mean, for example, he writes to Nerio Alessandri, I wish all the fortune in the world, but he never wanted to do a goddamn thing for Cesena. Like, I mean, do you know what I mean? And then he goes against the ultras and says they've always criticized me. However, without Cesena, they will also disappear.
It's not. It's just not true. Yeah, and I suppose it's not even reading between the lines. I mean, you can see from those kind of statements that it's someone who maybe not never, but someone who at the time of the dissolution wasn't in touch with what the fans wanted or needed by the sounds of things.
No, of course not. I mean, yeah, but I mean that letter was, that email was just, yeah. It was what it, you know. It's a lot of big words.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's all of it's a lot of the time is big words, and it's bluster is a word that I like to use for it. It's a lot of bluster, and it's people thinking that by putting out these big rambling, coherent, really sort of academic sounding statements that they'll get a pass and they'll be forgiven. Just because they sound clever, and you know they're very, very transparent most of the time, and you can always see through them. You know, it's interesting for me as well. Just again, not to draw too many comparisons with Palermo. This will probably be the last one that I ask you in regards to that. But do you think there was a theme surrounding both of these clubs and other clubs that maybe went defunct, that the officials were looking to make an example of clubs at this time, maybe considering you know, Calciopolo and the other scandals that had happened sort of what was that, towards the end of the early noughties, sort of beginning of 2010, around then? Do you think they were maybe being overly harsh to keep up appearances? I don't know if that's the right words. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I think they were left with no choice, to be honest, because again, because of the fact that Italian football had not ever attempted to create new revenue streams, and Italian football still suffers from that, and this the archaic stadiums, and of course the modern football product is not what Italian football is. And they just struggle to make ends meet, and the lower down the football ecosystem you go, the more difficult it becomes to make it sustainable, and that's when you get more and more desperate and you do more and more creative things. I mean, I think even if you just look at what Juventus did last season, it is now, when all of that thing exploded, the Prisma investigation, and you're looking at the absolute nonsense that they did. Why did they do that? Well, because COVID destroyed them, because they had been living beyond their means.
Literally.
And all of a sudden, the whole thing destroyed, and they got really creative legally and financially, and the whole thing ended up, well, because Juventus are a publicly traded company, and it's really, really serious to manipulate the stock market. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, things that they did not maybe intend, but inadvertently became a consequence of their actions.
Yeah,
it becomes really serious, and so the authorities have to step in, without you, just broadly speaking, because I mean Calciopoli was different. That was more match fixing and stuff like that, and other things which I don't want to get into. But this, we're talking about financial irregularities. Either you have to start doing what many clubs did, selling your big star players and starting over, and imposing, what the Elliott fund, Elliott did with Milan. They got rid of all the big wages, built with young and cheap, and tried to build talent, and find young talent that could grow at Milan, like Leao, like Tonali. And then, of course, they have to sell them on. I mean, now Beppe Marotta, the Inter CEO for sport, was very clear. He said, look, the fans have to understand, every year one big player will be sold. Because we have to. We don't own our own stadiums. The TV deal is an absolute abject joke. And this is what makes the Premier League so big. It is the TV deal, the new stadiums, the revenue streams that they make from every match day. I mean, stuff like that. It is that simple. I mean, this is something that Italian football fans, if you say you're against modern football, but if you want to stay competitive on the European stage with the Premier League clubs and the PSGs of the world, you're going to have to modernize. It's that simple.
You have to make a deal with the devil sometimes. Particularly as it is just now, and you're absolutely right. On a smaller scale, Scotland's the same. Our TV deal is a joke. Clubs have found other ways to make revenue, but it's all comparative, and the clubs that make revenue here to keep themselves afloat and to kind of make waves, if you like, and start to do a little bit better, is a drop in the water compared to clubs in Italy. By a huge extent. I mean, the gap is incomprehensible between some of the clubs, I could imagine. But you're right, it's something that they'd have to adopt if it's something that they'd want to keep going on. And the revenue stream side of things is really interesting. And it's something that I'm going to dig into a little bit later on. In terms of other clubs from Italy that have kind of slipped out of the leagues and became defunct, is there any that come to mind that have had kind of similar fates? Is it the majority of the time that politics and finances is involved, or are there any clubs that they've folded because they just didn't want to keep going, or anything along those lines?
There's been quite a few. I mean, Catania is a club that is very close to my heart. It's they were obviously, just a few years ago, they bottomed out. I mean, it's become one of those things where you bottom out. And in order to start over again, and this it's happened to Napoli many times as well, until Aurelio De Laurentiis took them over, and he's obviously a fantastic entrepreneur, and he's built something historic. I mean, winning the Scudetto with Napoli for the third time, it's just in their history is unbelievable. It's truly remarkable. So I mean, this will happen in Italian football time and time again, until they learn to live within their means and find new revenue streams, and to make it work. I mean, The big clubs, the Milans, the Inters, they've learned to do this by selling big players. I mean, Inter this season sold Andrea Onana, Milan sold Sandro Tonali.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just a reality of it. You have to monitor, you have to sell players and invest it. And I understand the frustration that fans of these historic, proud clubs who never used to do that, you know, are having to come to terms with it. But I'm sorry, but if those days when the Berlusconis and Morattis could keep these clubs afloat via artificial breathing, essentially financial breathing,
yeah,
is over. It's just not going to work. I mean, Juventus have one of the biggest companies in the world, Exor, owning them, and their shareholders are not happy with having to inject hundreds of millions of euros to keep Juventus afloat. And that's why you're hearing reports of Exor even selling Juventus after 100 years, because, well, you know, they for them, Juventus is just a big black hole.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, it's something that a lot of people don't realize is that out with what is given to the public in terms of clubs publishing their accounts every year or every 6 months or whatever, football clubs rarely, if ever, make a profit. They are not set up to make profit, not in how we understand profit. The majority of the time they're going to be making a loss, and they're going to be making heavy losses. And for a lot of teams, they are just black holes. That's what they are, and they're kept afloat year by year, or by different sort of 5-10 year plans that are put in place. Like it's very, very rare that football clubs become profitable enough for people to invest huge amounts of money in them, because they'll never see it again.
No, they won't, and that's the thing. Why I think, you know, when you look at, I mean, I read a report about even Premier League clubs barely turn a profit, and many of them are not solvent, which is insane to me.
No, they're not. It's just,
Which is insane to me, because how the hell can you have those revenue streams and not be profitable?
see, it's
I
we
don't understand what they're doing.
football clubs rarely, if ever, turn a profit. When they say they turn profit or that they make X amount of money, it's not how we would see us doing it for ourselves, or like for getting out of debt or out of an overdraft, for instance. This is the money that's here this season to keep us going. Some of that will be put towards this. We will have some money in the bank that will be put towards this. In terms of a functioning business, sorry, football clubs, they just do not enter the black. They are constantly in the red. They are constant black holes. They are constant money hoovers, basically. And as you say, there's a lot of clubs that aren't solvent. And as businesses, without this money constantly coming in these TV deals, the English bubble would have burst a long time ago.
Well, of course. I mean, every team in the Premier League is guaranteed £100 million just by playing in the Premier League without a single game being played. You know, if you have £99 million, every single Premier League club is guaranteed minimum. That's not prize money. That's just by playing in the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, if you get relegated, you have a parachute payment of about 100 million or just under. It's
I mean,
ridiculous.
I don't understand how you can't make a football club work when you have that much money to operate with. We're talking think about it, between match day revenue, those, just by playing in the Premier League, plus the prize money, we're talking 250 million pounds in revenue.
Easily.
Minimum. How the hell can you not stay within your means? Then I actually think, well, sorry, but then you deserve to not be in business. Then, I mean, I'm sorry, if you're guaranteed those kind of revenue streams and you still can't make it work,
exactly.
I don't understand that. I don't.
It's going somewhere, and it really does kind of point to some sinister stuff happening as
Exactly.
we've seen, and as has been happening. These people are involved, even though they won't be making money from it. They will be taking money from it.
Well, that's exactly it. The companies might be bleeding money, but it is that money is going in their pockets. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah,
one way or another. And that is quite disgusting, because it kind of drains football of that money, which could be used, which football needs. During the COVID, when they sacked mascots.
Yeah. Of course.
It was like, are you bloody serious? Like,
yeah, that's it. That's it. It's what it was for me is that, yes, these revenue streams exist, and without the people to fund those revenue streams, it's a huge hit. That's a fact. Okay. But when you're looking at things like that, like mascots, the people who are
Just
serving
yeah, the
pies,
average, yeah,
these are the
the
people that fans
workers,
interact with on a
yeah.
every single match day. They're the representation of the club and the aspect of it that they feel closest to in a lot of ways. What are you doing? But not only that, you've got the money to keep these people on. You're just choosing to cost cut out of greed. It
Mhm.
was incredible, honestly insane,
It's
insane. I remember that.
disgusting,
Yeah,
isn't it? It's disgusting, isn't it?
yeah,
But yeah, no, it's vile. It really is vile, and that's why I'm saying that I don't understand how. Yeah, but then again, the more you have, greed is it's greed, isn't it? It's simple
yeah.
as that. If the more you got, the more you want. Unfortunately, that's how this system and football is part of society, and that's just how it's wired, isn't it?
Yeah, it's greed and it's hyper capitalism. That's what it is,
Mhm.
and it's kind of
Exactly.
bled over in different ways now. And with oil rich states getting involved, it's becoming a lot messier than I think a lot of us would like. But that's a different podcast episode for a completely different time.
Yes,
You
yes.
go into huge rabbit holes. Of course, in terms of Cesena, just to kind of wrap things up, they're now sort of survived, I suppose, by a Phoenix club. Can they be called a Phoenix club? Because this is quite
Yeah,
interesting as well. It's Ace, or sorry, Cesena FC. They claim to be the Phoenix Club of AC Cesena, but they were founded as a team with a different name, and then
mhm.
they kind of bought the rights and then changed their names. But it's not really like that. It was almost like a proposition to um Romagna Centro and to Cesena FC. So it's quite an interesting story, and I don't think it's as kind of iffy as it sounds with people saying that they're claiming to be the Phoenix Club. It sounds like they're trying to carry them on almost.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit complicated, that, and it's one of those situations because Phoenix clubs are really sensitive. I mean, if you go into what happened with Chievo, and
Yeah,
Pellissier Sergio Pellissier, the club legend, tried to, he didn't want his Chievo to disappear, and then the whole thing turned into an absolute mess, and the former owner is suing everyone under the sun, and it's these things can get very messy when you talk when these Phoenix clubs kind of come up. But yeah, look, I think as time goes on, and if they continue to do well, and if they kind of were to reach, I mean, it depends on how the owners interact with the former fans, and they basically, if they kind of tie key figures, again, it's football politics as well. You got to basically say, look, we're the heir, we're the Phoenix Club, you got to do more than just say that. You have to involve the fans and key figures to make them feel connected with Cesena,
yeah.
so that they are the Cesena.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, you're totally right, and I think that's the thing because it's a bit different when a Phoenix club is founded by members of the community and the fan communities after a club goes defunct because they are carrying on the legacy through their experiences and presumably doing it in a better way that's more sustainable as well. But when it's you're buying clubs and then changing their names, there's a different elements and different layers to that and different dynamics as well. But if they do start doing well and if the fans do feel a connect to it, then I don't see why they couldn't just go all the way. Really, not all the way in terms of winning a Champions League
No, of course not.
or even a Scudetto, but yeah, you never know. You never know with these things. I
No,
mean,
you never know. You never know. You really don't know. But I hope. I mean, Cesena. I love all these clubs, especially. I mean, the smaller clubs, the smaller it gets, the more interesting it gets.
me too. I'm
And
a
there's so many
huge fan of them.
stories, especially in Italian football. And I have a certain affinity for clubs from the south. I think the
Ah,
south, everything
interesting.
Mezzogiorno, everything from Rome and southwards is always interesting to me.
Assuming the politics in Italian football will never be separate.
Italian football, Italy is. I remember when we interviewed Sven Goran Eriksson, and we he told us that his first job in Italy at Roma, he was not allowed to coach his team on the bench because at the time you couldn't, foreign coaches weren't allowed,
Mm,
so he had to sit on the stands and coach his team. Um,
crazy.
yeah, it's look, as he said to us, he's like, look, listen, Italy is Italy. you will never change it.
Sure.
And that's just how it is. You know, it's Italy's Italy. And for good, for bad, it's an old country. People forget that the world was once ruled from Rome thousands of years ago. It is
Absolutely.
an old place. A lot of everyone, things have been, those walls have seen everything,
Yeah.
right? And so it's the country that gave us Machiavelli, but it's also, so it's a very special place. It's a
Mm.
very special place, and I think it would be impossible for Italy to never be political. There's always going to be politics. Somehow, everything is political without it being party politics. I
Sure.
mean, the
Yeah.
politics of it. Football in Italy has politics, as knowing who to talk to and when and how, and
Different
build.
members.
It's
Absolutely.
political, all right.
Yes.
It's a society that just is for good. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Uh,
Of course. Absolutely.
I hope that or I think they will have to modernize, and by modernize I mean move away from a lot of the stuff that cripples the country.
Sure.
This culture almost, or this is a culture that is, because Italy is a country that has a lot of talented young people, but with lots of new ideas who want to implement them, but they never get anywhere because they don't know the right person or aren't related to the right person, or
Mm.
and that makes it that cripples the country and I don't think I think this aspect of it has to go away because the country won't function anymore.
Yeah.
And that applies to football too, and too many people are making too much money for that to happen. But before we reach catastrophe, I mean, Italy's the place where things have to completely go pear-shaped and to hell before anything good happens. I mean, it's the country that has a friend of mine who is Italian, Fulvio, and he's an Interista, he lives in Milan. He says, we're the country that perfected the art of sweeping shit under the rug. And he's absolutely right.
I've
Until
got.
until the point where there's so much shit under the rug that the rug is a mountain and the rug is barely touching the floor anymore.
It's funny because I've got a friend from Turin who kind of told me something similar, and his name's Thomas McKenna. His dad's from Edinburgh, so not a very Italian name. But he told me something very similar. I was speaking to him recently about FC Pisa, and something that one of my friends had asked about, and he was talking to me about the derby that they have with other teams, and then I was asking him about Livorno, and he was telling me about Livorno and Lucchese. And then he was talking about the city rivalries that go back decades and how this bleeds into the football. And it was just all so fascinating. But it's something that you would have to go digging around for. It's something that you would need to find out by speaking to fans who are immersed in it. And it's something it's just a little hidden bit of history that, as you said, is swept under the rug. It's not often seen, and yeah, I find it all incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It is what it is, and I'm sure it's Italy, and then you have to just accept it, and until people there no longer accept it and change it, it's just
Sure.
that simple.
Well, I certainly think we'll need to get you back on for an episode to talk about the politics of football in Italy and dive into all these different things that we've spoken about today. But for now, thank you very much for joining us tonight, Nima. This has been an excellent episode. Thank you once again to all of our listeners who tuned in for this. This has been a bit more of a feature-length episode. As well as talking about AC Cesena, we really wanted to dive into all these different things that we've spoken about tonight and really give a sort of in-depth context to how clubs in Italy can go defunct, and Nima has certainly delivered that. It's been a really, really fantastic chat, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Of course, if there's a topic that you would like us to cover which is related to football history and heritage, then please do get in touch. We're happy to cover anything from lost clubs, former stadiums, player histories, themes surrounding identity, culture, new community clubs, political clubs, you name it. We're happy to cover anything. Just get in touch with us, have a chat with us, and we'll see if it's something that we can fit onto the podcast. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. Please also check out our website, which is footballheritage.co.uk, where all of our written content lives. Some fantastic stuff going up just now from our contributors, so please go and have a look at that and support them if you're able to. But for now, Nima, say goodbye.
Absolutely. Good night. I really enjoyed this, Rory. Thank you for inviting me.
Anytime, Nima. Thank you once again for coming on. It's a goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.